Hello and welcome to In Motion, the Compass podcast. Compass is the Community Planning Association of Southwest Idaho. We plan for the future of Ada and Canyon counties and aim to give you the most up-to-date information on what's being planned in your area, updates and information regarding the region's long-range transportation plan, Communities in Motion 2050, and to keep you in the loop about Compass events so that you can be involved in the future of transportation here in the Treasure Valley. Today we're joined by Madeline Baron, a senior project manager with ECONorthwest, the Pacific Northwest's largest private economics consulting firm. At ECONorthwest, Madeline evaluates housing solutions across the entire spectrum of the market, developing feasibility, housing needs analyses, housing supply, affordable housing policies, anti-displacement efforts, and strategies to alleviate homelessness. Her work encompasses statistical analysis, strategic planning, real estate development, finance and funding, policy evaluation, and scenario planning. Madeline led the consultant team that assisted Compass in developing our Regional Housing Coordination Plan in 2023. We're also joined by Compass's assistant planner, Alexa Roitman. Alexa has been involved in the development of this plan and also manages Compass's Affordable Housing Advisory Work Group. In this episode, which will be the first in a two-part series, we will be discussing Compass's Regional Housing Coordination Plan, the growth in our region and how the housing market is affected by that growth, and the biggest impediments to meeting the rising need for affordable housing. Thank you both for being here. How are we doing today?
Hi.
Hi, thanks for having us.
We're so happy to have you. And so let's just jump right into the big topic of housing. The Treasure Valley is one of the fastest growing regions in the U.S. in the past decade. So with that growth, you can expect the need for housing to rise as well, of course. So to start us off, I'll lean towards Alexa to explain. So Compass is known as a transportation planning agency. Why are we starting to look at housing? What's the nexus?
Yeah, that's a great question, Josie, to start off with. So the connection is twofold. Compass member agencies understand that housing is a regional issue, and so they supported us in developing this regional housing coordination plan, which is where we met Madeline. And the second of that is that under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as IIJA, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, so that's also known as the bill, they're one and the same. But the metropolitan planning organizations receive new policy guidance, broadening the scope of topics they can address. And this includes integrating housing considerations in our planning framework, so acknowledging the interconnectedness of housing and transportation.
And Madeline, you worked closely with Compass staff to create the Regional Housing Coordination Plan this last year. Would you mind just briefly explaining what that plan is?
Yeah, certainly. So the Regional Housing Coordination Plan was Compass's understanding that housing and transportation are really closely linked. Where people live and how they get around town and how they commute to their jobs are all affected by the location, choice, availability, and cost of housing. And as Alexa said, housing is regional. Most people don't really pick a city or pick a city boundary and focus their choice of where they're going to live based on being in or out of a jurisdiction. That might apply to something like schools or other amenities, but usually it's just proximity to services and proximity to jobs and schools and educational opportunities and other services or groceries, that you might need in your average daily life. And so Compass, as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, decided that they wanted to explore the need and the challenges facing the region as it relates to housing, and needed to understand what its role might be. Since it's not legislatively driven to have a hand in housing, it wants to know how can it partner with other developers, realtors, service providers, and a host of other people, planners and the member agencies, to understand really what how it could affect housing, how it should affect housing.
Great. And do you want to kind of go over what your role was in this project as well?
Yeah, sure. So ECONorthwest partnered with a local planning agency called Agnew Beck, and we were, as is often with community planning agencies. We responded to a proposal. Compass said they wanted to do this project. We submitted a bid. We were selected as the team. And so my company, and I particularly, was the project manager. So I worked with Alexa and other staff at Compass to manage the deliverables, manage the final report, to conduct the survey and the public engagement that went into developing the recommendations. We managed the schedule and the budget, and then wrote the actual plan that was then publicly released.
And something I did want to add too that I think is really interesting about our selection of consultants and agencies, we do have subcommittees that help with that process, and which is made up of other member agencies. So it's not just Compass staff hiring, it's also members of our board, members of RTAC, and other committees that help pick those consultants.
Yeah, regional collaboration,
Yes,
for sure.
exactly.
Thanks, guys, for sharing that. And you kind of went over why people should correlate transportation and housing together. So if you were to just walk up to someone on the street and they walked up to you on the street more so and asked you, why should I even read this plan? What would you tell them?
I would say that the region's change in the housing market has been substantial. I think everyone kind of knows that. It's a topic du jour. It's probably topic on the street. And so the fact that Compass is looking to understand its role in housing and how it can serve its member agencies in regional coordination, it provides a roadmap of what the major challenges are in the region in terms of housing unaffordability, housing supply, how housing is developed. It's kind of got some primer information about just the fundamentals of how housing markets work and how development occurs. And then it also exemplifies some policies that are in place in the region that are working really well. And so what other cities can look to their peers and look to their neighbors to say, oh, you've done this great policy and it's resulted in this great change. Maybe we can implement that too. So the average person on the street would want to read the report to understand some data about what's been happening on population growth and on housing market changes, on supply challenges. They would understand some of the best policies that are working in the region, and then they would also understand kind of like what else needs to be done. So the final chapter in the report is about recommendations both for Compass to enact itself, but also longer term strategies that will kind of be needed in like the future. So this plan was the very first step in what is probably going to be a multi-step process as Compass starts to understand its role and then helps its agencies ameliorate their housing challenges.
One hot button issue when you talk about housing is affordability, right? So would you mind talking about the biggest impediments that we are facing to meet the needs of the affordable housing crisis, and how do current housing trends in the Treasure Valley factor into the sustainability of the housing market for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Treasure Valley has really just been on a roller coaster ride of the housing market. I know rents and prices were going up substantially, double digits year over year, particularly leading up to the pandemic and during the first phase of the pandemic. And then they've already started to come back down. And that's just a roller coaster ride that a lot of people don't want to be on. If you are trying to buy a house, it's really hard, not only due to supply constraints, but also the availability of credit. And now interest rates are pretty high. And so that really bites into what you can afford. And if you own a home, it's really challenging to see it skyrocket in value and then start to come back down again. Housing is in this country, housing is a vehicle for wealth generation, and so people don't want to see it volatile. They want to see it slow and steady. It's an investment. It's sometimes people's retirement. They're planning for retirement in that way, and so the need for affordable housing is definitely not an issue that is unique to this area. It is an issue across the country, big towns, small towns, urban towns, rural towns. It doesn't really matter. It comes down to what's called development feasibility and how new construction is financed and how it is brought online. And just like cars or clothes, new things are more expensive than old things, right? And so new supply is more expensive than the current stock of housing because it has today's interest rates and today's material costs and today's labor costs compared to decades past. So new supply is more expensive, but as just like cars and clothes, it ages over time and it becomes more affordable over time as it's worn in and as standards change. And so this process allows, when you have new supply, it allows people to sort of self-sort into the housing that meets their needs and meets their budget and meets their preferences. People's lives change. They might move out of their parents' house into an apartment, and then when they get married, maybe they have a kid, maybe they move to a house with a yard, etc. And when you're retired, you maybe downsize again. There's a common kind of life cycle of housing. But when there's not enough housing being built and you have strong population growth, you just have this intense competition. And that's where prices start to go up, rents start to go up, availability of vacancies go down, and the flow of the market starts to get stuck. It gums up, and it means, and actually right now what you're seeing with interest rates is that a lot of people who want to sell their house are afraid because they might have locked in a 3% interest rate 3 years ago, and now they're facing, if they move, a 7% interest rate, and that really affects the way people flow through the market. And when it comes to housing affordability, housing is typically people's number one cost in their monthly budget, and everyone needs a place to live. And so when there isn't enough and when prices are rising and the market is kind of gumming up, it just creates a lot of affordability challenges. But because everyone needs a place to live, you kind of just make do with what you can find. And people who have lower incomes or maybe accessibility needs are often the ones facing the fewest choices.
So I guess just to pull straight from the Regional Housing Coordination Plan, it specifically said that the region would need about 3,000 affordable housing units per year for the next 8 years to meet the needs of those earning below 50% of the area's median income. Do you think that's feasible, the 3,000 a year mark?
That's going to be ambitious. As I recall, it's quite a big ramp up from what has been produced in the past. So without some substantial changes to boost that segment of the development market, it's probably not going to be a metric that's going to be met in the near term. That said, new supply is essential, and the region has been building a lot. Unfortunately, it's not enough to keep up with demand and keep up with the amount of household formation that's actually occurring. And household formation is both from new people moving here, but also maybe young people moving out of their parents' house. And then finally, after the pandemic, when people were coupled, overcrowded and doubled up and living maybe with a roommate that was, for the time being, or for the recession, the scary economic circumstances, a lot of people spread out. They said, enough of that. I'm going to get my own house. I'm going to get my own apartment. And that household formation eats up stock. And so when you have two housemates splitting apart, you have a family and a kid moving out when they turn 18. The 3,000 units needed will be an ambitious target, like I said. And so it's both a matter of the current need and so this number was calculated because it's a matter of the current need, but also future household growth, both from continued population growth and changes in that household formation, like I was talking about. And incomes are going up region-wide and just on course with the country. National incomes, the average income is generally going up, but typically it's not enough compared to the rent and price increases as well. So there's a growing need for more affordable housing units.
I think also what I'm hearing from Madeline too is that there has been before this boom, maybe before this like big growth that the region has seen, that production was still really small. So we don't know those numbers. However, we can maybe assume that production was much lower, before 2020. So you're catching up from a time that you kind of wish maybe production was just more steady.
Yeah.
Rather than just like, 1, 2, 3, or 4, where we're catching up from a past, right? So from past loss of production.
Underproduction.
Underproduction, underproduction.
And we unpack that a lot in the report. And so nationwide, in the aftermath of the Great Recession from 2009 to 2010, and that was a housing market crash. There was a housing asset bubble that burst and caused global financial crisis. Most of us remember that. Everyone remembers that. Who was an adult at that time. But a lot of architects, construction laborers, developers, plumbers, electricians retired, or they went out of business, or they retrained and they said this industry is too volatile, or hey, the market has crashed so deep that I can't count on getting new work. And lending really dried up at that period in time. And so it took a really long time for construction to come back to the levels that we had been seeing. And that's not to say that the levels that we were seeing in 2007 and 8 were healthy, because that was the asset bubble that was really frothy. And but at the time that construction kind of ground to a halt, people were moving to cities in droves, and it was a big migration trend across the country. A lot of colleges are in cities. A lot of people sought the city economy when the economy had gone down and they were in need of jobs. So it was a really big time of change, and it took a long time to dig out from. And so actually a lot of the rapid changes that many cities saw in 2016, 17, 18, 19 were the lagging effect of strong growth. And not every city has seen strong growth. Like there's some cities in the Rust Belt and the Midwest that aren't growing. But Boise, other cities in the West Coast are growing, as you know, really fast. And so when construction lags so far, it always lags because people move here and a house takes 2 to 3 years, or an apartment takes 2 to 3 years to build. So it always lags. But in that period in time in particular, it lagged extra long. And so a lot of the steep changes that were causing problems, like you were saying, this underproduction of housing, the number of units that were being built compared to the number of households that were coming and forming. And also it has to do with demographics, and the millennial generation was also pretty big at that period in time, and they were moving out of houses and forming households. So there's just like these macroeconomic trends that are factoring into really localized issues.
Yeah.
Just what factors would you be able to address when discussing current market conditions, both locally and on the macroeconomic scale?
Yeah. Nationwide housing markets are again going through another reckoning. We're still the post-pandemic shifts in where people are living is really still causing problems. Cities are still catching up to where people went 2 to 3 years ago. I know that's playing out here. So, this region's housing market roller coaster continues in that prices have actually started to decline. Prices peaked in about May 2022. So home prices have already started to decline. And a lot of that is being driven by continued people settling and moving. So I think the census demonstrated, when the census released its 2022 population estimates for the region, this was back in June 2023. It's always lagging. The city of Boise saw population decline, which was a big change from the strong growth that was seen in the years prior to that. But the region is still growing and the state is still growing. So it's actually a trend that we're seeing nationwide about people moving away from big cities because of the affordability challenges. Mm-hmm. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that housing unaffordability, and sometimes you don't like what services you're getting, or you don't like the environment of the city anymore, or there's millennials having children and moving to suburbs. There's a lot of factors at play. So there's continued migration and just changes in where people are living. And that's not necessarily a trend that's specific to this region, but I think it's particularly acute in this region just because of the challenge, because of the strong growth that has been happening here. But also, you can't not talk about interest rates, and 6 and 7% mortgage rates really, really factor in. It's not just mortgage rates, but the ability for a builder to get a construction loan. And so when interest rates are high, the amount of loan that someone can take out and then the rents and the prices that they're going to need to charge, all of that goes up and development feasibility goes down. And so those are some of the macroeconomic things affecting the market right now.
Thank you, Madeline and Alexa. Be sure to check out part 2 to continue the discussion about housing. We'll be posting that one next month. If you'd like to read the Housing Coordination Plan and see the data for yourself, visit our website, compassidaho.org. Staying up to date with what we're up to just got a whole lot easier with our Compass podcast. Stay tuned for future episodes on your favorite streaming platform. If you have ideas for future episodes or if you would like more information, email us directly at info@compassidaho.org. Thanks for listening. Drive safely, Treasure Valley.